Welcome back after lunch to our afternoon session. So the first speaker this afternoon is Norm Darwin. I think probably Norm needs no introduction to any of you here today. He is written authoritative publications on automobile history in Australia, focusing particularly on the history of Holden and Ford. He's currently undertaking his PhD at RMIT, where he's researching the history of car design from 1903 to 1953. I understand he's finished his first draft in 18 months, which is unheard of, almost. It's ridiculous. So that speaks a lot for his own speed, versatility and endurance, I think. He's a powerhouse of industry himself. So we'll get started quickly, because I know there'll be lots of questions following this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. This paper, for the first time, will examine and disclose the initial 30 years of automotive design and styling at Holden between 1917 and 1953. And the paper will explore the emergence of the Holden design team, their place in the design community, their skill level, the local design content in the 48215, which was released in 1948. The design of Holden motor bodies can be traced to 1917, when three men, Edward Holden, an engineer, Albert Sheen, a salesman, and Frederick Hack, a motor body builder, came together to design Australia's first standardised motor body on a Dodge chassis. And interestingly, earlier today, we talked about Holden motor bodies and their origins. And as you'll see, the history of Holden's going into motor bodies has been distorted from day one. And it stems back to Nancy Buttfield's history, which she wrote on the Holden family. She was Edward Holden's daughter. And she rather ignored Frederick Hack. So Holden's first bodybuilder, Frederick Hack, he took over his father's firm, which was Hack and Company, and he changed it to FT Hack and Company. He formed the company in 1905, and he provided the machinery, the men and expertise to the Holden family, who were trading as Holden and Frost when they purchased Hack's firm. This building here, which purports to be Holden Motor Bodybuilders, is actually Hack's building that he erected in King William Street in 1914. He went to America in 1913 and bought a great deal of woodworking and bodybuilding machinery, installed it in the factory, and yet 17 years later, Holden had purchased his building at a knockdown price. I speculate that his problem was he extended himself financially. The war happened the year that he went into business with his new building. His men went off to war. He had neither men to make motor bodies or he had customers. In 1917, when the tariff was introduced, Hack was sitting on a rather substantial building, and Holden saw an opportunity to step in and purchase it, and they were ready to make bodies. A myth is perpetuated that Holden built motor bodies pre-1917. They neither had the manpower or the facilities. The firm certainly trimmed motor bodies and fitted bodies to several chassis, and this has been documented by a number of people. But it's been suggested that these bodies were made by Holden. In fact, they were made by Hack, and they included Model T Ford bodies, because Hack held the contract to build deluxe bodies for Terrence in Melbourne. This is an interior shot in 1918 of the Hack's works, but now owned by Holden. Hack's never really been given credit for the role that he played in providing GMH. Holden has kind of ignored the fact that they bought a going business to get into the bodybuilding area. The design of Holden's first body was along traditional lines, the work performed by Hack, who would have produced what's called a cant, full-size drawing. This, unfortunately, is an English body. It comes out of Butler's book from 1914. but it illustrates the sort of drawing that draftsmen were required to do to build motor bodies. And it's on the French, what they call the French scale, of 3/4 of an inch to a foot. Previously, the first step in producing an early model building, early motor bodybuilding body was a rough sketch followed by a chalk outline, full size on a blackboard on the floor or on the wall. Patterns were taken, a wooden frame made, and then sheet metal in either aluminium or steel was fixed to the frame. The process might take 2 to 3 months. This is a photograph of the Melbourne Motorbody Works in 1910, but clearly shows a blackboard with a trace of a motor body. Fairly agricultural type of setup in 1910. A standardised body, however, enabled one design to be manufactured in quantity, and in Holden's case, it fitted a variety of motor chassis. The impetus for moving to a standardised body was the embargo on imported bodies in 1917. Holden were the first to react, urged on by Sheeny, who needed Dodge bodies for his growing distributorship. And this is a 1918 Dodge body made by Holden. By 1920, Holden were producing about 40 bodies per day for Dodge, Chevrolet, and now Buick, Hubmobile and Morris in Hack's former premises. A new factory soon swamped this building, and the previous speaker has showed a photograph of this building. It was built in 2 stages, 2/3 of it up to about that door there, that seam line there was built first, and Hack's building actually sat in there. So when they kept expanding, they had to knock Hack's business down and finish building the Holden Motorbody Works in King William Street. Following an agreement with General Motors in 1923 for all of General Motors' passenger car bodies, Holden sought trained draftsmen. They were able to secure the services of Bert Wylie, South Australian, who had recently returned from the American Ford Company, where he'd been fully trained in layout drafting. The first drafting area comprised of 2 draftsmen, Wylie and Charles Phillips, and a young trainee who happened to be Wylie's 16-year-old son, Tom. And they worked behind a Hessian screen that was hanging in the King William Street tool room. By 1925, the new purpose-built drawing office in King William Street was operational, with full-size layout drafting tables and chalkboards on the side. The guy in the front here is Charlie Phillips, and that's Herbert Wylie standing. This is the team by 1927 and comprises Charlie Phillips on the end, Bal Stacey, Wylie, Hartley Chaplin, Wylie's son Tom, and the guy on the end is Roy Rainsford, part of the Rainsford family that's quite well known in South Australia. Wylie and his team now, I've already read that, and what they were working to was what's called George Mercer's 10-inch grid system. The drawing here is one done by Mercer in 1926 and was part of a drafting course that was published in the Australian Coach and Motor Bodybuilder here in Australia, as well as being extensively published in America. This is the earliest drawing that I can find of a 10-inch gridded drawing. The 10-inch grid, what it enabled draftsmen to do was not have a scale. They knew that each square was 10 inches, so all they needed to do to work out the length of the part was count the number of 10-inch squares that it occupied and the bits hanging over the end, and they had their measurement. By 1928, the engineering team had gained Kingston Stewart as the manager, and the young trainee draftsman Reg Hall, and Barbara Sandford. At this time, a diverse range of motorbody styles was being developed. not only for the 6 GM chassis, but 18 different makes that included Austin, Fiat, Hudson, Hubmobile, Ford, Essex. This brand has been the first to have a Holden closed body, 1924 Essex. The chart indicates the growth of Holden motor bodies from early in 1928 through to 37, but the significant thing is the amount of red on the left-hand side decreases rapidly to depression, but after the depression it's all filled with white, and that's changing from open cars to closed cars. Barbara Sanford. Barbara Sanford was employed by Holden Motor bodybuilders to take charge of the colour research department at the Woodville plant. Thus Sanford has become the company's first stylist, responsible for the 1927 two-tone colour schemes. And we'd know nothing about Sanford except that Ford released, as Michael's already mentioned, the improved A with all these colours developed by Ewer and Thea Proctor. And I believe what happened is they sent PR all over Australia for these Fords, and the guys in the newspapers in Adelaide thought, well, if Ford's doing this, what's Holden doing? So they trotted along to Holden to find out that Holden indeed had somebody working in their colour department developing colours. And of course 1927 in America, Harley's mad on colour, and he's gone mad on several LaSalle cars. But he also had Chevrolet do two-tone for the first time, and they prepared 3 colour schemes. Barbara Sanford developed 7 colour schemes, and this is one of them. And it's the only restored 1927 Chev I can find in Australia where the owners actually restored the car using the original colour scheme. The only trained artist in the team was Val Stacey. He was perhaps responsible for some of Holden's early body innovation, including maybe these Moonlight Speedster. This car's an interesting car, and it's caused a great deal of comment because it's actually based on a Vauxhall Hurlingham body. One of the difficulties though is the Hurlingham Vauxhall is 10 inches longer than the Vauxhall in wheelbase. So there's an interesting challenge for a bodybuilder to shorten the body. And we're currently struggling with the issue of, did the Vauxhall Hurlingham body get built in Australia? And did they build too many in 1931 and not sell them, and so modify them for the cheaper Chev chassis? Questions yet to be answered. Holden Motor Bodybuilders and General Motors merger in 1931 created 2 engineering departments, one at Woodville and one at South Melbourne under Cliff Kay. This was principally a commercial body operation, and the truck you see there is the sort of body, including the tray, that Cliff Kay was overseeing. The top picture shows the Woodville, first Woodville drawing office in 1933. And I've already talked about Charlie Phillips, and he's on this board here, and the guy here in the front, sorry, that's Charlie Phillips and that's Rich Hall. And you can see the full-size chalk boards at the back. When the new MD, Lawrence Hartnett, is sent to fix or close Holden in 1934, there is a shift in engineering autonomy. Hartnett lets his engineers and designers get on with it. New styles emerge, and the coupe utility is the first new style that Holden introduced, and it's not an American body style, which had previously been unknown because there was an American managing director prior to Hartnett, and his view was that Holden had to build what was available in America. And for low volume models, this was very difficult because of the cost. The origins of the coupe has been much discussed, but this is really the origin of the coupe utility. Kay and his team in the South Melbourne plant were building this Chevrolet utility, which If you look at the side, from the door to the back is one panel. The typical American utility, the cab was separate and the pickup bed was separate. That's what I would call pickups. Whereas in Australia, our utilities tended to have a single piece of sheet metal, and the act of putting a fixed roof on it is natural when you think about it. It's a logical thing to do. There's nothing fancy about it. Even though Ford were the first to get theirs on the market, Holden's followed just 4 months later. So there was really no copying because they were both developing the same vehicle at the same time. In 1934, Holden also built a truck cap styling drawing. It's the earliest styling drawing that I can actually find from 1934. Norm Pointer was appointed a chief engineer over both departments. Norm Pointer started his life as the chief engineer at a company called Forward Downs, and in 1923 Holden needed a press to press panels to make their cars look just like General Motors overseas cars. Norm Pointer built these 3 presses, this one, and this one, at the end of 1923, had them installed in 24, and there you see them still working in about 1938. I'm not sure how long they lasted for, but after Holden finished with them, somebody else took them over. Just by interest, the other 2 presses, they are built by Vickers Roller in Richmond in 1936. So it was a bit of an Australian press line until they bought a huge Hamilton press to produce the one-piece roof panel. With low volume production, Holden had to be very innovative, and this is the same sedan body but on 3 different motor chassis. You can see that the Chevrolet has no boot, the Graham Page has a square boot, the Rio has a rounded boot. So by mixing and matching different features on the cars with different panels, they could create a different looking car for a different company. The other thing to note is that this has mouldings that are added to the car. The Tourer, the Chevrolet Tourer, which is exactly the same as the sedan, uses common panels, especially the boot area, but it has a pressed-on moulding rather than a stick-on, simply to make the car different. They could also put extra space in the doors or the cowl to fit a much longer wheelbase. So this is a Cadillac sedan. In 1935, Holden produced a new body called the All-Enclosed Coupé. We know it as the sloper, and it was an attempt at aerodynamics. And this was as good as Holden could get because they weren't able to change the front of the car, which came from America. Holden were only making the cowl, a firewall back to the rear bumper. The car was unique in that the seating system folded down to give a load space through to the boot, and this was patented by Holden and used in many General Motors cars, station wagons, for many years. In 1937, the all-steel body arrived and they were able to redesign the all-enclosed coupe. There was also a Vauxhall version built with a cabriolet roof, where they simply trimmed the roof off and put a soft top in it. Another innovation. The introduction of a large Hamilton press not only gave Holden the ability to press a steel roof from a single piece, it allowed the design of a single side frame that eliminated 8 weld joints and several small individual panels to improve dust sealing. We've already heard Leo mentioned how dust sealing was critical. Well, back in the 30s it was critical then, and this single low-cost side panel provided one panel instead of a separate panel for the cowl, a separate panel for the centre pillar, a separate rear quarter, a top roof rail and an outer sill rail. So they eliminated all those little panels and made one big one. At the same time, they didn't have a weld joint in these corners. So therefore, they were able to have much better tolerances on their door fitment. Holden in 1938 also produced a single unit body for the Vauxhall. wyvern. The advances in body engineering provided Holden engineers with the expertise to produce a new body for their own car. This period also saw the emergence of Holden's styling department. An American, Frank Hershey, arrived to set up a studio in Woodville. Holden hired an English stylist, Charles Beavis, for the same job at Fisherman's Bend. Illustrators and artists were hired. Gil Mathwin, Alf Pays, Jack Bergen, Fred Stowood and Joan Thompson. This is some shots from the Woodville drawing office and shows Bergen sitting in the front here, Gil Mathwin standing, Alf Pays there and Stowood in the middle. And I believe this is Stowood standing here painting a car. These photos were taken in about 1945. Further expertise was gained during munitions production and development during World War II. Holden built the Grey Marine diesel, Gypsy moth engine, the Rhino scout car, cruiser tank power cells, Canadian War Office cabs, guns and aircraft. All this expertise helped attract a second wave of designers. Jack Rawnsley, Charlie Patterson, Fred James, Glenn Sinclair, John Buckley and Bill Abbott are all trained engineers. So we've gone from being a draftsman-based engineering company to an engineering company. Even though Australia was at war, General Motors-Holden continued building their own car. Planning to build their own car. And in 1942 proposals surfaced. One by Beavis on the top, and the second one, which I believe is drawn by Mathwin. The top drawing is interesting in that it's really a draftsman's drawing, but it's got an artist's interior drawn on a draftsman's drawing. Meanwhile, at Woodville, Hartnett has his team build a seating buck, and on the quiet, he builds an Australian version of what the Americans are turning into the Australian car. And the car on the left, we first see it in Holden's book, Big Wheels and Little Wheels, but we don't realise that it actually goes and is drivable until a piece of film turns up, and it was run for the first time during the Shifting Gear exhibition and clearly shows that car being driven. That's the instrument panel, and the bottom, Hartnett also had a station wagon on the go, which was never built in the original Holden car. Holden or GMH never officially recognised their own designers and the design contribution they made in the first car until the car turned 50. And at that time, 3 of the original team were left, James, Patterson and Rawnsley. And they were extensively publicised in newspapers at the time. The body designers who worked alongside the Americans, mechanical engineers, included Hall, Kay, Stacey, Wylie, Quarry, Phillips, Sinclair and Buckley. And this photo is taken in Detroit in 1946 and is basically the Holden body design team. At the time, this is the earliest gridded drawing I can find. This is done by Robin Dunn, GMH, draftsman. But Reg Hall, he didn't make it into the other photograph. Reg Hall rose from a mailboy to the chief body engineer at Holden, and due to sheer hard work and his uncanny ability to see 2-dimensional layout drawings in 3 dimensions. The drawing underneath is one that I managed to extract out of Holden last week. It's the earliest one I can find. It's a 1962 drawing of an E.H. Holden, a layout drawing. So you have to imagine that the drawings that Reg Hall was looking at had all 3 views drawn on one on top of the other. So it was just a massive lines, and to be able to look at that and see it in 3 dimensions was quite a skill. This is the straight after the war, Hartnett consolidated both engineering departments at Fisherman's Bend. So this is the new styling area at Fisherman's Bend in 1947. This is, of course, the car they released, taken in Detroit prior to being shipped to Australia. It's the first prototype. The car was subsequently released on November the 20th. One of the features of this car was an integral sedan, but one of the features, unique features, was it had a bolt-on front. And I haven't found any other examples of an integral built car with a bolt-on front. And it was done because Holden invested so much money in shipping and the tooling for the body. They couldn't afford to have the length of the front end if it was welded on the car. They would have to completely revise all their tooling. So in summary, the original small team of Holden draftsmen in 1930 made a significant contribution to Australian automobile design, and that they all contributed to the design and development of the first Holden body structure, soundproofing, seating structure and internal trim. And I've listed what happened to those original team, where they went. The interesting one is Roy Rainsford became the chief engineer of Chrysler, and one I haven't mentioned there, Bill Abbott, he became BMC's chief engineer, and then he became CAC's managing director. Over the next 20 years, GMH successfully designed their own engines, transmissions and axles. The design department came of age, perhaps under Leo, firstly because he let his designers have a free rein as to what they could do. They weren't really controlled. Even though Leo was an American, he acted more like an Australian than an American. And he trained guys like Paul Barringer, and Paul's here today, and other guys, and they've gone on to create, Mike Simcoe started in, I think, 1982 under Leo. I think it was still just there, and created the Monaro, and the Monaros sold all over the world. Sold more Monaros in America than they did in Australia. And of course, now Richard Falazio's developed Effigy, and just recently Warwick Leach, the Buick Avenir. And I think there's a key there that if Penny ever redoes her book, then there's a place for Australian car design. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Norm. That's a fascinating history. I love seeing the different ages and techniques of the industrial design of cars. So we've got a question already.
Thanks, Norm. Terrific stuff.
This is from Mike.
Oh, good. You going to commentate?
No, you can talk. There's no sound.
Okay. Well, look, one thing that was fascinating. One thing that I was certainly not aware of was that going back to that earlier period, GMH were not building the entire body. They're only going from the cowl back. I think you said in the 1930s, 20s and 30s.
Sorry, I missed it.
The bodies that GMH were building in the 20s and perhaps the 30s, they were only building from the cowl back.
Yes.
So I just
from the cowl back.
So
and the mudguards were imported.
Yeah. So I just wondered if you could expand on that, about why that was and what effect that had on the overall design.
The cost of tooling. The cost of tooling up the grille and the bonnet and the fenders. In actual fact, I discovered quite interestingly after I produced my first book that my father's flipping through it, and there's a photo in my first book of the pack shop in Woodville. And he looks at me and he said, yeah, I worked in there just before I went off to the Air Force. And I said, you never told me that. And he said, yeah, we were making packs for mudguards for the 1942 model. So Holden actually were planning to make mudguards in 1939, 1940 for the 42 models, but of course it never happened.
Norm, I've got a question about that, the Hornets prototype. Do you know the story of what happened there? What happened when that went to Detroit?
Well, he never. The Americans didn't know he did it, and who knows what happened to the car? It just it disappeared. It was big hush hush on Hartnett's. Hart had always believed his version was going to be the car that was built, but of course the Americans had a totally different view about his style.
Norm, if I just add to that, when that model, there was what, 6 or 8 models went over there, I forget the number, but the fact that they were all done in Australia, and Harley Earl, of course, was running the GM side of the design business, he didn't invent them, so he didn't want any part of them. And that's exactly what happened. It was, if you look at the 48-215 and look at a 4950 Chevrolet, they are very, very similar. And the 50 Chevrolet was Earl's car. So that's what it had to be for Australia as well.
What I didn't talk about is that the styling of the 48-215 was done by Frank Hirsch, who had already been to Australia, and he was a loose end going between Pontiac and Cadillac straight after the war. Nothing much to do. Will you draw us a Holden? So he drew a Holden. Interestingly, he put a little tail light, a little corner piece tail light, which Holden knocked out because they didn't want to tool it up. But that little tail light ended up on the 49 Cadillac.
Thanks so much, Norm. We might move on to our next paper now. Our next speaker. Oh, okay. An explanation.
How did I get my hands on it? I rang Richard Falazio up and I said, please, I want to borrow a layout drawing, thinking he'd give me a full-size one, but fortunately they were able to find a quarter-scale layout drawing, which is really only for demonstration purposes. So a full-size one would have taken 4 bays of that window.
Thanks, Norm. Let's give Norm another clap.